And now we're going to discuss metacognition, or thinking about thinking. That's a very important skill that a teacher or a student need to have in order to be an effective learner. So let's discuss what is metacognition. Literally, metacognition refers to a process coming after or beyond. Meta actually means after or beyond. Act of acquiring knowledge. It's a thinking about thinking, or a space beyond thinking where we can plan, monitor, assess our effort to think, know, or learn about something. All people engage in metacognition to at least some extent. They plan on developing knowledge or skills in a certain area. They think about strategies they can use to develop those skills. They evaluate how well their chosen strategies work, as well as their current level, as they try to determine what challenges are appropriate or take on the next. And they revise their practice accordingly. So, as we discussed, metacognition is thinking about thinking, and we specifically needed to learn English, for example. When we learn English, sometimes, of course, it's our teachers who advise us on a particular strategy to learn, to think, to act, to plan, to monitor. But sometimes when we do self-study, for example, imagine you don't have a teacher, but you want to learn a language. You would certainly need to think about your progress. And of course, if you're your own teacher, you would have to think about your own learning. You would have to think about specific milestones, how to achieve the goals, and what is your weaknesses and what is your strong strengths. So that's probably the most important skill to learn, especially when you do self-study. The recipe for metacognition. Researchers have identified three main components to make up metacognition. They're not clear separate aspects, but rather interact together in a complex ways to influence the way you learn. So that's metacognitive knowledge, what you know about yourself and others in terms of thinking and learning processes. It's metacognitive regulation, the activities and strategies you use to control your learning, and metacognitive experiences, the thoughts and feelings you have while studying and learning something. So metacognitive knowledge is basically what you know about yourself in terms of thinking and learning processes. So for example, you might believe that you're a visual learner, and therefore you need to surround yourself with visuals of language materials. For example, you might make a lot of stickers, or you might create mnemonics and print them out, or you might think about visual images to create in your head to remember something, and that's metacognitive knowledge. So what you know about your learning. Oh, so for example, you can say, I learn better in the morning because I'm more productive in the morning and I'm not very productive in the evening. And this is all metacognitive knowledge. What about metacognitive regulation? Those are activities and strategies you use to control your learning. So what does it mean? So for example, you say that I would block all my social media on the phone and on my computer because it distracts me a lot. Or I can use a Pomodoro principle or Pomodoro technique to focus, which is basically focusing for the burst of 20-25 minutes. So it seems so easy to focus on 20 minutes. So you set a timer for 20 minutes, you learn, and then you make break, and then again you learn. And this is a Pomodoro technique. So it's a metacognitive regulation. So there's a strategies that you make. And metacognitive experiences. So sometimes, and that's, if you read, for example, the book by Carol Dweck, she says about fixed mindset and growth mindset. And sometimes we think, I'm not good at math, or I'm not good in English. And that's how we feel about it. And once we determine that we are not good at something, we create all sorts of obstacles, or we create all sorts of excuses to avoid this activity. So it's very important that we say, I'm good at languages, or at least the more I learn, the better I get. It's not like I would learn a lot, but I would forget everything. So it's very important, the feelings that we create during the process, there should be positive. So we should create certain incentives. So for example, I would study today, and then I would do something that I really like. And those are metacognitive experiences. So we have to make the experience positive. We have to make sure that the feelings that we have are positive throughout the process. How to regulate your metacognition. According to scientists, there are only 3 skills you need to master in order to improve your metacognition. It's planning. Before you start learning something new, think about appropriate learning strategies you will use, as well as how you will allocate your time and energy. So what does it mean? Remember about learning strategies? Like, everybody is different, and everybody has their own way to learn certain things. So like I said, it could be about, so in this context, it's about allocating your time. If you're busy, you could say that, okay, I would spend 15 minutes learning the language, revising the words. And even that could make a huge impact on your learning. And of course, if you allocate more than 1 hour, the progress is going to be amazing, given that you use the appropriate strategies. So for example, if you're only learning words, but you want to learn speaking, it's not very effective. So if you want to improve your speaking, you have to learn how to say phrases. So it's very important not just to read some phrases, but to actually speak the phrases, or record your voice, or look at the specific dialects and remember specific phrases, not just learn the words. And this is the appropriate strategy. About the time, of course, some people are productive in the morning, some people are productive in the evening. So that's also very important. In terms of learning words, for example, spacing is very important. So for example, you learn the words and then you give some space, some time, and then you revise it in some time later. That's a very important strategy to think about. It's called spacing. Okay, this this space is based on your metacognitive knowledge on yourself, learning strategies, when to use them, and maximize your performance. So planning is very important. It's very important that you set a goal of studying. So for example, you say, I want to study 1 hour per day, 5 days per week. So by the end of this week, I should study for 5 hours. So that's like a minimum goal, but then you can set the goal on vocabulary. You can say, I would learn 5 words per day. So it depends on your motivation, and of course it depends what exactly you want to improve. But it's very important to plan your efforts, to plan your strategies, to have a specific plan and write it down. Monitoring. While learning, stay aware of your progress. Are you struggling with certain aspect in particular? Are there other sections that seem to be a breeze to go through? Instead of passively experiencing your thoughts and feelings, always question everything. So let's take IELTS, for example. When you prepare for IELTS, you have 4 sections. It's reading, listening, writing, and speaking. For some people, it's easier to do listening. So they spend a lot of time doing a lot of listening exercise. Some people don't like reading, so they avoid reading and do very few practices on reading because it's too long, it's very frustrating. So they end up doing something they like and not so much what they don't like. And that's, remember we discussed the fallacies, or it's something like a bias, maybe our brain that makes. Sometimes we lean towards something that we like and we discard or postpone or find excuses not to do something we don't like. So it's very important that you focus on things that are difficult as well as something that's easy. And maybe sometimes it makes sense to start with something that's difficult to reward yourself and do something that you like afterwards. Yes, and very important to analyze like what particular aspect is difficult and why, what could make it easier. Because once you pinpoint what exactly is that, for example, you cannot learn a lot of words per day, it's okay. You can find some tricks how to learn words, such as mnemonics or drilling them, you trying to use them in a sentence, discussing with other people, try to explain to other person. That's all strategies that would help you with learning vocabulary. Evaluating. When you're done with a chunk, consider how well you performed and re-evaluate the strategies you used. This is, I think, tricky. Evaluation is certainly easier to be done by the other person, because if you do the evaluation yourself, I see that there are two different polarization in this aspect. Some students are very strict to themselves, and if they make like one mistake, they're going to say that it didn't work and it's horrible and so on and so forth. But some students do everything quite well with a very few, maybe do little or no progress, and they are not critical of themselves. I know it's hard, and the only measurement that you have to make is compare yourself to the previous time. So for example, you should be objective and you should try to track your progress. Don't compare your progress to other person's progress. Only compare yourself to yourself yesterday. So for example, yesterday I could only learn 5 words per day. Now I can learn 10. That's a progress. Of course, you might be very ambitious in your plan and set very ambitious goals, but it's very important to revise your goals and say, okay, I plan to study 5 hours per week. It didn't work. I have to be realistic. I can only do 4 hours, or I can only do 3 hours. I could see it from my schedule. And then you can, of course, adjust it. You can make it more than that or less than that, but you just have to be very realistic, and you have to be very kind to yourself when you're learning, and not be very critical or self-critical. Planning. During the planning phase, learners think about learning goal. The teacher has to set and consider how they will approach the task, which strategies they will use. At this stage, it's helpful for learners to ask themselves, what am I being asked to do? Which strategies will I use? Are there any strategies I have used before that might be useful? So for example, imagine a teacher give you a task of making a project to record a video. So what I'm being asked to do, is it just to record the video, or it's the video that should have certain grammar points in English, or it should be creative? So what are the criteria? That's very important. Which strategies will I use? So in this context, if you shoot the video, it's about the strategies for recording, structuring your content, and presenting. So there are different strategies all together combined are going to be strategies for your presentation, for your video. Are there any strategies that I have used before that might be useful? Of course, it's very good to be ambitious and try new tools, but if you know already the tools that worked before for you, it's good to use them. So think about specific things that you already know and try to use them. If you can use something different or something extra, do that again. Monitoring. During the monitoring phase, learners implementing their plan and monitor their progress they're making towards their goal. Students might decide to make changes to the strategies they are using if they are not working. As students work through the task, it will help them to ask themselves, is strategies that I'm using working? Do I need to try something different? So that's another thing. Some students believe that they have certain strategies that work for them and they don't want to change them. But sometimes when you see that there is little progress or no progress, it might be the time to revise a strategy and to think of a different strategy, think of a different approach that might be more effective. So you have to be very honest and very objective about that. And if you can't do it for some reason, you can ask your teacher, or you can ask your friend or your colleague or a group mate, somebody from your group or classmate to make these changes. Evaluation. During the evaluation phase, students determine how successful their strategy they used was in helping them to achieve their learning goal. To promote evaluation, students could consider how well did I do, what didn't go well, what could I do differently next time, what went well, what other types of problems can I use the strategy for. So you can see that there are a lot of questions, and the questions are of a reflective nature. So meta thinking is all about thinking about thinking. So you have certain thinking processes, but normally you never explicitly think, is that correct what I'm thinking? Is that the right way to think? Is there any other way to think about this? Is there any other way to improve that? And that's basically what meta thinking is all about. You think, you plan first what to do, and you think about that, like the way you plan things, the way you evaluate things, and then you think about monitoring the progress, and finally you do the evaluation, especially when you have a milestone, like you have the goal for a month, right? In a month you can do evaluation, but of course evaluation could be done on an everyday basis, every week basis, every month basis. You can try to ask for your teacher's feedback, for your peers' feedback. That all could be helpful, and incorporate their reflection or their answers with your own, and see what matches and what doesn't match. Reflection is a fundamental part of the plan, monitor, evaluate process. Encouraging learners to self-question throughout the process will support this reflection. So all the questions that we had on every slide were the reflection questions. And of course, meta thinking is all about reflection. It's all about thinking, and we do that by asking questions, by reflecting on a previous experience, by reflecting on our mistakes, by reflecting on our progress. This all makes us better thinkers, critical thinkers, and of course it facilitates progress, and it sets the right mindset for future success.